Armenia Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, final election results certified, civil contract retains 3/5 majority. Opposition forces take election dispute to Constitutional Court. Russia's trade restrictions and Europe's response, and the ECHR rules against Azerbaijan in a landmark 2016 war case. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
On June 14, Armenia's Central Electoral Commission certified the final results of the June 7 parliamentary elections, confirming Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party as the winner with 49.7% of the vote. Strong Armenia came second with 23.2%, followed by Armenia Alliance with 9.9%. Prosperous Armenia received 3.9%, narrowly missing the 4% threshold required for parliamentary representation. The CEC also announced that it would not order repeat voting at 3 polling stations where results had been invalidated, concluding that the affected ballots would not alter the overall outcome of the election. Well, this decision really carries significant implications for the composition of the parliament, because Prosperous Armenia is saying if the votes from these stations were counted, they would actually make the threshold.
Right, the 4%. So it's a very narrow window that they had. And, we've talked about this last week. Civil contract retains its 3/5 majority, not 2/3 to take the country to referendum, a constitutional referendum, but also it could pass laws and a number of key appointments without the opposition support.
Now, if Prosperous Armenia gets into parliament, civil contract will lose that
its
privilege.
3/5. Exactly.
Yes. Well, the decision not to hold repeat voting drew criticism from opposition parties and election observers. Actually,
it led to disagreements in our own office because
it's really it's not just a gray area, it's a really dark gray area, and it's a big area. It's not a gray spot.
Well, let's explain it first of all.
Well, yes, there are several official explanations. Let's talk about those. Well, the CEC has defended its position.
This is about the 3 polling stations that they're saying that will not be revotes. There will not be
any revotes, and the votes from those voting stations are annulled. Well, the CEC is arguing that a rerun would take place under fundamentally different conditions, with nearly all nationwide results already known. Not nearly all
of them known, right?
No. Well, according to the commission, this could encourage tactical voting, with voters seeking to influence a known outcome rather than express their original political preferences. The CEC cited the guidelines from the Venice Commissions, which has warned that partial reruns may not always guarantee a fair result because of the risk of tactical voting. It also argued that repeat voting could place a small group of voters in circumstances different from those faced by all other voters and affect the principle of equal suffrage.
But the counter argument to that is, well, you just fundamentally took away those people's right, those voters' right to take part in an election. They took part in the election. There were violations in those 3 precincts, not of their own fault, right? It wasn't their fault. It was the fault of whoever, the Electoral Commission, the organizers. And I understand the tactical voting. I understand that people know the outcome, but you're also taking away their right? So this is where this big gray area.
According to our consciousness and like civil rights, but not according to the law, because the law allows Armenia's law allows for the annulment of certain number of votes in case of irregularities.
That won't impact the outcome. But Rube, it will impact the outcome.
Or otherwise, they vote knowing the end game, which means their vote matters more than my vote.
Right. So it becomes
which means they're voting between civil contract and prosperous. That means the rights of all the other participants are not there. Or it means that we have to say, you know what, it's okay that there were irregularities. We're going to be okay with after-hour voting.
Right, because for those that don't know, at the heart of it is polls close.
2 precincts.
Right. Polls closed at 8 p.m., but army units were brought into the polling stations to vote, which is their right to vote. But I think they came late. Till 10 p.m., these soldiers were voting, which is a violation of the law.
And in one other case where one number 8 was missing from the ballots,
right.
Like the whole party was missing from the ballots. So either we're okay with that, or we're okay with votes being lost, or we're okay that 2,000 people are going to vote and their vote will count 10 times more than my vote, your vote, vote and everyone
I think that
else's
none
vote.
of us are okay with this. Whatever way you
Yeah.
view it, it's just a bad situation at this
It
point.
is a
It's
really bad situation.
A number of civil society groups, observation missions are chiming in. The Aganades observation mission disputed that reasoning, the one that you just explained, Rubina. That's the position of the CEC. Citing Article 101 of Armenia's electoral code, the group argues that repeat voting should be held when electoral violations may have affected the outcome, and a rerun could remedy the consequences of those violations. According to Aganades, alternative calculations suggest that prosperous Armenia would cross the 4% threshold, as we've said, and the results from the 3 invalidated precincts have been included. The observer group argued that the CEC failed to adequately explain how invalidating or annulling more than, it's actually 3,000 votes, group, not 2,000, could not affect the allocation of mandates, and questioned the decision not to hold a repeat vote. The Independent Observer Alliance also criticized the decision, calling the failure to hold repeat voting unlawful and warning that it could undermine public confidence in the election results. They're considering legal action. In fact, we did find out that what they are doing now is they're going to those actual citizens, the voters in those precincts, and encouraging them, I think, that they could take the CEC to court for violating their personal sort of civic rights. So we're going to see what's happening in the coming
We're going to
weeks.
see what's happening in the coming weeks at the Constitutional Court.
Yes.
Because now the case rests with the Constitutional Court because 4 political forces appealed, actually 5, but a little bit separately. 4 political known opposition forces appealed to the Constitutional Court seeking to overturn the election results or force a runoff vote. Strong Armenia, DOC, this is Dog's party.
Yeah.
We all remember him from the
Yes.
municipal elections. Wings of Unity, they all allege widespread election violations, including misuse of administrative resources and vote buying. The Armenia Alliance and Prosperous Armenia have also announced plans to challenge the results, while under Armenian law, the Constitutional Court must decide within 2 days whether to accept the appeals for review or not, and if it does, it must issue a ruling within 15 days.
Well, it's not only these forces. Arman Babajanyan's Rally for the Republic Party has also announced plans to challenge the election results in the Constitutional Court. Babajanyan's arguing that the election was conducted under unequal conditions and alleges that administrative pressure, financial influence, information attacks, and foreign interference undermined the integrity and legitimacy of the vote. He's basically saying that, well, the opposition forces, let's call them the opposition forces, especially Strong Armenia, distributed voter bribes. They spent a lot of money convincing people to vote based on money. He's talking about Russian interference in the media ecosystem. So their objective is a little different, but at the same time, everybody's, asking for the Constitutional Court's opinion on this matter.
At the same time, law enforcement agencies continue to pursue election-related cases involving opposition figures, largely centered on allegations of vote buying and other electoral offenses. This week, the Prosecutor General's office referred 17 cases, criminal cases involving alleged election-related crime to court. The cases involve 60 individuals. According to the prosecutor, several of the cases involve members, candidates, and supporters of the Strong Armenia Party. Allegations include offering voters money, jobs, housing, land, government positions, and debt relief in exchange for votes. In one case, a parliamentary candidate and his wife are accused of promising to cover the cost of an eye surgery for a voter in Sunik in return for electoral support. And other allegations include distributing cash under the guise of charity, paying voters to attend a political rally, and pressuring local officials and residents in Sunik to vote for a particular political force. Prosecutors also say multiple cases involve cash payments to voters in Yerevan, Ararat province, and Metsamor. The prosecutor's office also reported a case involving a supporter of the Prosperous Armenia Party who allegedly promised a resident of Stepanavan money in exchange.
Well, look, the deeper question here is, why do parties still think vote buying works? Well, we could argue that
maybe
it works. And then why do people still take the bribes? Why do they allow themselves to be in that situation? But that's as you said earlier, Khorkain Pilusopayagan hearts. It's a deep philosophical question that we need to be discussing. In the meantime, moving on to other things or related, actually, former director of Electric Networks Armenia, David Ghazinian, who is a parliamentary candidate from the Strong Armenia Alliance, has been detained on suspicion of electoral bribes, according to Armenia's Anti-Corruption Committee. The detention comes after the CEC approved requests from prosecutors to authorize criminal proceedings against Khazinian and to allow his arrest because they have immunity
As candidates, they have immunity.
So the Central Electoral Commission has to give permission. Authorities have not released additional details about the allegation.
Well, the CEC also, stripped Kocharian of immunity, but we'll talk about that later because it's not election related. Pashinyan signaled a tougher stance towards opposition forces accused of electoral violations. Speaking in parliament, he said safeguards must be put in place to ensure that political forces engaged in vote buying are unable to exert political influence in Armenia. Now, so this is the situation, which is, I think, a pretty funny, in a way, situation, because the opposition is saying, oh, this is a disaster, like widespread, terrible, nothing was legitimate. The government is saying, we're legitimate, but whoever else that got into parliament with us is not.
Rubina, we're looking at 5 years of chaos ahead of us, I think.
Well, Pashinyan argued that the opposition expected to enter the newly elected National Assembly had been formed through an unlawful activity and therefore lacked legitimacy. Pashinyan said the Armenian state had the right to take measures to prevent such forces from continuing their political activities, adding that his party had committed to doing so during the election campaign already. So they're moving fast because they made the promises before the elections. He had a very similar answer regarding the proposed law to the electoral code, which is one of the main provisions is if you've not been in the country in the last 6 months, you might not be able to vote in the next elections.
Yeah, they're moving very quickly on.
And when he was asked, is like, why now? Like, you could have done this before the election, for example, or maybe in 2 months, unless you're preparing for snap elections. Why the timing, right? Well, his response was very similar. We promised during the campaign and we're delivering as soon as we can. Well, he also further stated that Armenia has overcome the external security risks that previously constrained the government's actions. As a result, he said the government, the public, and the ruling majority could now focus on dismantling what he describes, as has done so several times, as the criminal oligarchy, including political forces accused of vote buying. He said that process was already underway and would continue through the completion.
Well, if they've overcome the external security risk that previously constrained them to do this, then they can also work on institution building and doing all of the other things that they promised, right, in their election campaign. But moving along, Strong Armenia Alliance leader Samvel Garabedian, who remains under house arrest, called for an immediate structured consolidation of all opposition parties. Again, he's doing these mini press conferences in his
boutique press conference.
Boutique press conference. I like that. To maintain transparency and prevent backroom fatigue among citizens. I don't know what that means. He proposes that the opposition's internal discussions and decision-making processes be broadcast live to the public. It was really interesting. He was saying, us in the opposition, we made a mistake. We should have come together before the elections. Then we would have had a chance. But now we have to unite. And, what did he call it? Ujer and Hamagar.
The rally.
The rally.
The rally is supposed to be...
I'm jumping ahead. Garabedian strongly denounced the election, labeling it as the world's most disgraceful and morally corrupt organized elections. He argued that authorities fundamentally disrupted every phase, including the campaign period, voting day, and the final ballot count.
He said they stopped counting at one point, didn't finish the count because they decided that this is
good enough.
They won. But we actually officially have the results.
I know. At this point, it's just like, I'm just saying what they're saying with it. He also announced plans to formally reach out to the leadership of major powers, specifically naming the United States, prominent European nations, Russia, and China. He revealed plans to invite foreign ambassadors and heads of international organizations to the opposition council meetings to present documented evidence of election violations and systemic issues. When questioned about immediate post-election rallies or boycotting parliament, Garabedian urged patience. He warned against rushing into street protests without a clear objective. Nevertheless, he did call for a strong and reliable rally along with other opposition forces to project strength and reliability and thus gain genuine support of the people. Also, Armenia Alliance is not very clear if they're going to, partake in...
Armenia Alliance has, it's been my observation that has been relatively quiet post-election, even though they have said they will contest the election results in
Constitutional Court. They have yet to do that.
And, Strong Armenia, technically Garabedian is saying that he's taking the lead for all opposition forces.
The unified opposition.
Because there has not been any response from any any other opposition forces since. This announcement, this boutique press conference was day before our recording. Kremlin has yet to issue an official response to Armenia's election or congratulations note to Pashinyan. Tensions between Yerevan and Moscow appeared to ease, though, somewhat this week. The rhetoric has a little bit come down because previously it was, everything the opposition is saying. Now it's like,
catastrophic, worst elections in recorded history.
Well, even though broad trade restrictions are in place, so that hasn't been lifted. Russia's ambassador to Armenia, Sergei Kopyrkin, said that relations between the two countries have entered a phase of reassessment and adaptation to shifting global and regional realities, adding that Moscow stands ready to conduct that process constructively and on a mutually beneficial basis. Kopyrkin stressed that Moscow has never questioned Armenia's right to pursue an independent foreign policy. He did, however, add a caveat saying, we expect that Yerevan's engagement with other partners will not damage our bilateral ties or be directed against Russia. Russia's foreign intelligence chief described the situation in Armenia as not simple and called the results of the country's recent elections inconclusive and in a certain sense questionable, adding that very lively political processes would continue. It's interesting that the foreign intelligence chief of Russia knows what will likely happen in Armenia, lively political processes. In the days immediately following the election, Russian officials were more critical, as we said. Russia's foreign intelligence chief said Russia nonetheless hopes to preserve good relations with Yerevan across all areas and expressed confidence that this would be the outcome. During a press conference, Yarek Pashinyan was asked, what is happening? He said there is a planned visit to Moscow, and he said he'll take up these issues and they will, not his words, but iron things over during that visit.
Meanwhile, the head of Russia's agricultural and food safety regulator, Rozel Khoznadzar, that's the only time I'm going to say that. It's a difficult word for me to say. Sergei Dankvert dismissed the idea that recent restrictions on Armenia's agricultural exports are politically motivated. Speaking to a state-run newspaper, he said the measures stem from long-standing quality and safety concerns rather than politics. He attributed the core problem to Armenia's fragmented production structure. The country relies heavily on small-scale farmers who send their goods to export without adequate internal quality controls or cooperative oversight. Dankvert described a situation in which thousands of bunches of herbs are consolidated onto a single truck, making meaningful inspection at that stage practically impossible. He added that restrictions are typically imposed on individual enterprises, small businesses, rather than entire countries.
So they have an issue with Armenia's business model, not, the size of Armenian businesses.
Yes, and that he went on to say that broader country-level action only follows when problems are found to be systemic.
He also said that his agency had already written dozens of letters to Armenia's economy ministry telling them what needed to be done. Armenia's economy minister, Gevok Papoyan, pushed back. He attributed the claim to unanswered letters to a possible misunderstanding. The minister also announced he would travel to Russia twice within the coming month to meet with various partners, saying all outstanding issues should be addressed at the negotiating table. On the broader trade dispute, Papoyan acknowledged that Russian import restrictions on Armenian goods had created a shock for exporters. However, he said the impact had been partially cushioned through export diversification.
On the other hand, Martin Galistyan, head of Armenia's central bank, speaking about the economic effects of export restrictions by Russia, noted that if Armenian exporters cannot find new countries to buy their products, a massive buildup of unsold goods will get stuck inside Armenia. This oversupply will push local prices down by up to 0.6%, depending on how harsh trade restrictions or bans end up being. The total damage to the income of local farmers and food processors could affect up to 2% of Armenia's GDP. For farmers and businesses struggling to pay off their bank loans because of these export blockades, Kalistyan said that the CBA is working on solutions with the government and said that this is not a new problem for the central bank, pointing out that they successfully ran similar relief programs during COVID-19 and the 2020 war. Meanwhile, Armenia's government approved a new support package aimed at mitigating the impact of these restrictions, Russian restrictions on domestic greenhouse operators. It amended the state's Greenhouse Development Assistance Program to provide additional financial relief to exporters, according to Baboyan, the Minister of Economy. Under the newly approved measures, qualifying greenhouse operators will receive loan extensions.
And the European Union announced 34 million euro in immediate financial support for Armenia, the first tranche of a broader 50 million assistance package unveiled by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. This was earlier this month. According to the EU, the package is aimed at strengthening Armenia's economic resilience and includes measures to facilitate trade and expand access to regional and European markets. EU Commissioner for Enlargement Marta Kos said the bloc remains committed to supporting Armenia's sovereignty, democracy, and independence. She said the funding is intended to help address immediate economic challenges while creating new opportunities for Armenian businesses.
And in other news, a senior aide to Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev visited Armenia over the weekend for talks aimed at advancing the peace process between the two countries. Hikmet Hajiev, Aliyev's foreign policy advisor, met with Armenia's Security Council Secretary Armen Grigoryan in Dilijan, where the two sides discussed the peace agenda, confidence-building measures, and the importance of maintaining a direct dialogue. It was kind of shocking, right? It was like right after...
We were not prepared for it, and as the Central Electoral Commission is reading the final results, this is happening in Dilijan.
I know, and they were strolling in Dilijan. It was very strange. But Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said the meeting was intended to restore momentum to the peace process following parliamentary elections, and also touched on issues related to prisoners. These are Armenian prisoners of war that are still being held in Baku, and border management. The two sides agreed to continue talks, with the next meeting expected to take place in Azerbaijan.
And the European Court of Human Rights issued a judgment this week finding Azerbaijan responsible for the torture and unlawful killing of an Armenian soldier during the four-day war in April of 2016 in Nagorno-Karabakh. The case was brought by the parents and sister of an Armenian major in the Nagorno-Karabakh army who was killed on April 2. This was back in 2016 near the village of Talish. His hands were severed while he was still alive and was subsequently killed by decapitation. His driver was found decapitated nearby as well. An Azerbaijani soldier later posted an image showing his mutilated head and a severed wrist. And from 2016, we also very well remember the ears that were cut off from that elderly couple in Talish.
It was our first real, for me, horrific shock at the brutality. It was not only this soldier.
Well, Azerbaijan was ordered to pay the parents of the Armenian servicemen 60,000 euros and his sister 30,000 euros in non-pecuniary damages, together with 14,210 euros in costs and expenses to be paid directly to the NGO which represented the applicants. This judgment is the first issued by ECHR arising from April 2016 war. Armenian servicemen were mutilated in several high-profile cases. An ethnic Yazdi conscript, Kiaram Soloyan, was similarly beheaded in 2016. Anush Abetian, a female soldier, was mutilated in September of 2022 in a single execution. At least 7 and likely 9 unarmed soldiers were filmed being executed near Mount Metz Ishkhanasar in September of 2022, and these are some of the cases that
Armenia is hosting the annual Eagle Partner 2026 military exercise from June 17 to 25, focused on preparing participating units for international peacekeeping missions. The exercise brings together 343 service members from 4 countries, 250 from the Armenian Peacekeeping Brigade, 58 from the U.S. Army, Europe and Africa, and the Kansas National Guard, 24 from France, and 11 from Greece, the latter 2 participating for the first time because it was always the U.S. Army, Europe and Africa, and the Armenian units. Now in its 4th consecutive year, Eagle Partner has become a regular fixture in Armenia's defense cooperation with the United States. France and Greece, close partners of both countries, are participating, as we said, for the first time. Training will cover peacekeeping task preparation and execution, with an emphasis on improving interoperability among participating units, exchanging best practices in command and tactical communication, and strengthening the readiness of Armenia's peacekeeping contingent.
Well, Maria, I'm being a little bit optimistic here. Remember last time this happened and we wanted to find out the number of Armenian servicemen participating, and the army said it was a state secret and they wouldn't answer, but we asked the Americans and they gave us the numbers. So it's good that it's being published, the numbers, and no longer, at least one less thing is a state secret. And more in defense news, 2 Armenian ministers traveled to Paris this week for the Eurosatory 2026 defense exhibition, where they held a series of high-level meetings with French and European officials. Defense Minister Suren Papikian met with representatives of Airbus and French defense companies, while Armenia also signed a deal to purchase 6 Airbus H-145 helicopters for transport missions, the country's first acquisition from the manufacturer. Meanwhile, High-Tech Industry Minister Mekhtar Hayrabetian discussed expanding cooperation with France and the EU in defense innovation and advanced technologies. He also highlighted the rapid growth of Armenia's defense industrial sector, noting that Armenian military products are now being exported. Separately, Germany donated 16 snowmobiles to Armenia's armed forces for use in high-altitude mountainous terrain.
Now, we're not coming back to the elections, but we kind of are. Armenia's Central Electoral Commission has approved a request from the Prosecutor General's office to lift the parliamentary immunity of former President Robert Kocharian, the leader of the Armenia Alliance. Kocharian's lawyer Aram Orbelian said prosecutors intend to charge the former president with abuse of office and money laundering. According to the defense, the case is linked to a government-approved transaction dating back to Kocharian's presidency and a subsequent investment by his son in the Masterclass Tennis Complex project. Orbelian denied any wrongdoing by Kocharian or his family.
And he was stopped from leaving the country.
Yeah, he made an announcement that he is leaving for a few days.
For Russia, for a few days he was stopped, and there was a bit of controversy because there was a video of him being at the passport control.
Yeah, why
and
did
there
they
was
who released that?
The release of that video, which served no purpose.
Absolutely.
Well, Armenia's Prosecutor General's office says it has uncovered new irregularities involving assets linked to prosperous Armenia leader Gagik Tsarukyan. Prosecutors allege that Ararat Cement, a company owned by Tsarukyan, improperly acquired the Golden Key Health Resort in the town of Ararat in 2003. They claim the company failed to meet investment and job creation commitments tied to the purchase and later committed false documents to demonstrate compliance. The case has been referred to the Anti-Corruption Committee for possible criminal investigation, while prosecutors are seeking to revoke Ararat Cement's ownership of the property. The allegations are the latest in a series of legal challenges involving Tsarukyan's businesses. Last month, prosecutors raised concerns about other assets linked to Ararat Cement and suggested the government consider appointing a temporary administrator, not just assets linked to Ararat Cement, but the Ararat Cement company itself.
In a related development, an Armenian court has invalidated the National Olympic Committee of Armenia's ownership registration of a 225-hectare plot of land in the resort town of Zargatsor that encompasses the town's ski lift complex. The National Olympic Committee is headed by Gagik Tsarukyan. The ruling stems from a lawsuit filed by prosecutors who argued that the land was improperly transferred to the committee in 2005. The administrative court agreed, finding that the organization did not have the legal basis to claim ownership of the property under the legislation cited during the registration process. The National Olympic Committee has appealed the decision. And as always, articles that we published this week, we have an opinion piece by Gurgen Greg Sarkisian. It's called Armenia After the Election, Beyond Old Divides. It's basically, he's looking at the deep divisions that are shaping the debate, not only in Armenia, but also in the diaspora. And rather than questioning one another's patriotism, which is what is always happening, he says Armenians must find ways to bridge differences and build consensus around Armenia's future.
And an opinion piece again by Mikhail Zolyan.
Everybody had a lot of opinions, didn't they?
A lot of the opinions had the same message, though.
Yes, of course.
Well, in one way or another, because we were kind of making fun. It's like everyone seems to be suggesting that they start a party, and some are starting a leftist party, Green Party, anarchist party. Well, one battle after another. What I think about the Armenian election. This is the title of Zolyan's piece, and he starts, describing the wine fest as because it was on the same day
As the
closing
elections.
as the election. Well, he also explores the anxieties and hopes of post-election Armenia, the challenge of Russian interference, the responsibilities of citizenship, and what it means to shape the country's future rather than simply watch it unfold.
And then we have a piece by Armine Bagian. It's called Armenia's Next Democratic Challenge, Building a Credible Opposition. And I really appreciated this article because, one of the tragedies of Armenia's political landscape is that we've always had weak opposition. And she said democracies are judged not only by those who lead the country, who govern, but also by the strength of those who challenge them. She looks at the 2026 parliamentary election and she says that building a credible, constructive opposition is essential to the country's democratic consolidation.
It was a very interesting piece, and I really the part that stuck with me is like the quality of Armenia's opposition changed when Pashinyan, as an opposition parliamentarian with the YELK alliance
that's right.
with Bright Armenia, came were the first 9 parliamentarians that were actual opposition. Before that, there wasn't an outspoken opposition in Armenia's parliament as such. It was it never looked at things from that perspective before. Well, and the opinion piece or a column by Maria Kungo, it's called A Country Blessed by Mountains, and it's again very Kungo-esque. She explores Armenia's mountains, and she's really says that even though mountains are everywhere in Armenia, almost seen from any other window, as wherever you look there's a mountain, the culture of hiking the way it is
in other countries
isn't
still
developed.
developing.
It's still developing, and she takes pride in being one of the first to be at the beginning stages of this culture.
And it's a beautiful piece, as always. And finally, another article that we just published today, Russian trade restrictions expose Armenia's economic vulnerability. This is by Lewin Rogers, and he looks at how these latest restrictions on Armenian goods have exposed the risks of economic dependence at a real pivotal political moment. And so as Moscow turns commerce into geopolitical weapon, Armenia faces mounting pressure to diversify its markets and accelerate its integration with Europe.
And I did have a little bit of a conversation, a podcast with a photojournalist, a veteran photojournalist who was in Armenia, Giles Clark. It was a very interesting conversation, I thought. And one example that really, really stuck with me from that conversation, and he had exclusive access to photos that no one had access to for 5 years from a conflict country, and how he failed and no one took these photos. Eventually, he was offering them for free to media outlets to take, and no one wanted to publish the story. And he was sharing his thoughts of how it was when he started 18 years ago,
And how it is
and
now.
what the media landscape is now, and what it takes to be a photojournalist today.
A lot of tenacity, for sure. Well, that's the kind of week it's been here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we will be back again next week.